Sarah Martinez stepped off the bus at Fort Benning with nothing but a worn duffel bag and determination burning in her chest. The Georgia heat hit her like a wall, but she kept her shoulders straight as she joined the line of nervous recruits. At 19, she was smaller than most of the men around her. Her dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, her clothes marking her as someone who didn't come from money. The other recruits sized her up immediately. She could hear their whispered comments about the little girl who thought she could make it through basic training. Some laughed openly when they saw her struggle to lift her gear bag onto her shoulder. Marcus Thompson, a tall recruit from Texas, made it his mission to point out every mistake she made during the first day's orientation. "Look at Tiny over there," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. "She's gonna wash out before week 1 is over." The group around him chuckled, and Sarah felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. But she said nothing, just gripped her bag tighter and kept walking. The barracks assignment put her in the same building as the loudest of her critics. As she unpacked her few belongings, she could hear them making bets on how long she'd last. Someone suggested 3 days. Another said she wouldn't make it past the first physical fitness test. The laughter echoed through the thin walls. But Sarah continued folding her clothes with mechanical precision. That first night, as she lay on the narrow bunk listening to the sounds of 24 other recruits settling in for sleep, Sarah stared at the ceiling and remembered why she was there. Her younger brother Miguel had been killed in Afghanistan 6 months earlier. He'd been a Marine, proud and strong, everything she'd always wanted to be. The flag that had covered his coffin now sat in her mother's living room. But the pain of his loss lived in Sarah's heart every single day. She'd grown up in East Los Angeles, where opportunities were scarce and dreams often died young. Her family had immigrated from El Salvador when she was 5, and her parents worked multiple jobs just to keep food on the table. Miguel had been the first to break the cycle, enlisting right after high school and sending money home whenever he could. His death had shattered their family, but it had also ignited something fierce in Sarah. The military represented more than just a career to her. It was a chance to honor her brother's memory, to serve something bigger than herself, and to prove that a girl from the barrio could stand shoulder to shoulder with anyone. She'd scored high enough on the ASVAB to qualify for any job she wanted, but she'd chosen infantry specifically because it was the hardest path, the one that would prove she belonged. Now, listening to her fellow recruits mock her ambitions, Sarah made a silent promise to herself. She would not quit. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her fail. Whatever it took, however hard the training became, she would earn her place here. The classified documents hidden in the lining of her old jacket, documents that proved her brother had died protecting a convoy of wounded soldiers, rather than in the random IED explosion the family had been told about, would have to wait. First, she had to survive basic training. Sleep came fitfully that first night, interrupted by homesickness and the weight of expectations. But when the drill sergeant's whistle pierced the darkness at 4:30 a.m., Sarah was already awake, already preparing herself for the battle ahead. The first weeks of basic training were a nightmare that tested every limit Sarah thought she had. Drill Sergeant Williams was a mountain of a man with a voice that could shatter glass and eyes that seemed to see every weakness, every moment of doubt. He pushed all the recruits hard, but Sarah felt like she carried an extra target on her back. Every morning began with physical training that left her muscles screaming. While the bigger recruits struggled with the running, Sarah found her small frame was actually an advantage on the track. She could keep pace with the fastest runners, her legs moving like pistons as she lapped some of the men who had mocked her size. But when it came to the obstacle course, her lack of upper body strength became painfully obvious. The rope climb was her nemesis. Day after day she'd make it halfway up before her arms gave out, sliding back down while Marcus and his friends offered loud commentary about her failures. "Martinez is going to get people killed if she makes it through," Marcus would say during chow time. "What happens when she can't carry a wounded soldier? What happens when she's too weak to pull her own weight?" The other recruits began to distance themselves from her, not wanting to be associated with what they saw as the weak link in their unit. Sarah ate alone, cleaned her gear alone, and spent her few free moments writing letters to her mother that she never sent. She couldn't bear to tell her family how badly things were going, couldn't admit that maybe Miguel's little sister wasn't as strong as she'd thought. But something strange began happening during the academic portions of training. When they studied military history, Sarah absorbed every detail like a sponge. She understood tactics and strategy in a way that seemed to come naturally. During map reading exercises, she could navigate terrain that left other recruits confused and lost. Her test scores were consistently at the top of the class, even surpassing recruits who'd attended military academies. Drill Sergeant Williams noticed, though he never showed it. During a particularly challenging field exercise, when half the squad got turned around in the Georgia woods, it was Sarah who quietly corrected their course, guiding them back to the extraction point while the designated squad leaders argued about which direction to go. She didn't seek credit or recognition, just did what needed to be done. The harassment continued, but it began to take on a different tone. Instead of questioning whether she belonged there at all, some recruits started to resent what they saw as special treatment. "She's getting easy grades because she's a girl," someone would mutter when her test scores were posted. "They're going soft on her because of political correctness." Sarah knew the truth was exactly the opposite. She was being held to a higher standard than everyone else, not a lower one. Every mistake was magnified, every success downplayed. She had to be twice as good just to be considered half as capable. The unfairness of it all ate at her, but she channeled that anger into fuel for improvement. Late at night, when the others were asleep, she would practice knots, memorize field manual procedures, and work on her physical weaknesses. She did push-ups until her arms shook, practiced combat movements until they became second nature, and studied battle scenarios until she could recite them from memory. Her dedication was invisible to most, but Drill Sergeant Williams saw everything. One evening, as she struggled through yet another failed attempt at the rope climb, he approached her after the others had gone to chow. "Martinez," he said, his voice unusually quiet. "Why are you here?" Sarah wiped sweat from her face and looked him directly in the eye. "To serve my country, Drill Sergeant. That's what they all say. I'm asking why you're really here." For a moment, Sarah considered telling him about Miguel, about the promise she'd made to honor his memory. But instead, she simply said, "Because I belong here, Drill Sergeant. Even if no one else thinks so." William studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "We'll see about that, Martinez. We'll see about that." The turning point came during the 6th week of training. During what the drill sergeants called Hell Week, the recruits were pushed beyond exhaustion with sleep deprivation, constant physical challenges, and high-stress scenarios designed to break the weak and forge the strong. Sarah had managed to survive everything thrown at her so far, but she was hanging on by the thinnest of threads. The final test of Hell Week was a grueling 48-hour field exercise that combined everything they'd learned. Squads were dropped in different locations across the training area with minimal supplies and a series of objectives to complete. They had to navigate using only map and compass, establish communications with base, complete reconnaissance missions, and survive on military rations while evading enemy forces played by advanced training instructors. Sarah's squad was led by Marcus Thompson, who had emerged as an unofficial leader among the recruits despite his constant negativity toward her. As they gathered around the map in the pre-dawn darkness, Marcus made his feelings clear. "We're going to have to carry dead weight," he said, glancing meaningfully at Sarah. "Some of us aren't going to be able to keep up when things get tough." The first day went badly. Marcus led them in circles for hours, refusing to admit he'd misread the terrain features on the map. When Sarah quietly suggested they were off course, he snapped at her to keep her opinions to herself. By nightfall, they were exhausted, lost, and had failed to complete their first 2 objectives. Morale was at rock bottom, and several squad members were openly discussing whether they should radio for extraction. That night, as they huddled in a makeshift shelter, Sarah studied the map by moonlight while the others slept. She could see exactly where they'd gone wrong, could trace the path they needed to take to get back on track, but she also knew that challenging Marcus's leadership directly would only make things worse. She'd learned that sometimes you had to be smart about when and how to fight your battles. The next morning brought a crisis that changed everything. During a river crossing exercise, one of the recruits, a quiet kid named Johnson from Ohio, slipped on the wet rocks and was swept downstream by the current. The water was deeper and faster than it looked, and Johnson, weighed down by his full pack, was struggling to stay afloat. Marcus froze. For all his bravado and leadership posturing, he panicked when faced with a real emergency. Other squad members shouted suggestions but seemed paralyzed by indecision. Precious seconds ticked by as Johnson was carried further downstream, his head disappearing under the water for longer and longer periods. Sarah didn't think. She just moved. Dropping her pack and weapon, she dove into the river without hesitation. The cold water hit her like a physical blow, and the current immediately grabbed her, but she was a strong swimmer thanks to years at the community center pool back home. She angled her approach carefully, using the current to her advantage rather than fighting against it. She reached Johnson just as he was going under for what might have been the last time. He was panicking, thrashing wildly in a way that could drag them both down. Sarah had trained as a lifeguard during high school summers, and those skills came flooding back. She approached from behind, got her arm across his chest, and began the difficult task of towing him toward shore. The current was stronger than anything she'd experienced before, and Johnson's dead weight made every stroke a monumental effort. Her lungs burned and her muscles screamed, but she refused to let go. Slowly, fighting for every yard, she managed to angle them toward a shallow area downstream, where the other squad members were running to help. When they finally dragged Johnson onto the bank, he was coughing up river water but alive. Sarah collapsed beside him, exhausted but alert, checking his condition the way they'd been taught in their combat lifesaver course. Johnson would be fine, shaken but unharmed. The real damage was to the squad's perception of who could be counted on when things went wrong. Marcus stood dripping on the riverbank, his face flushed with embarrassment and something that might have been shame. He'd been exposed as someone who talked big but couldn't perform when lives were on the line. Sarah, meanwhile, had proven exactly the opposite. Without fanfare or self-promotion, she'd simply done what needed to be done. The rest of the exercise proceeded in a different atmosphere. Marcus was still officially in charge, but when navigation decisions needed to be made, eyes turned to Sarah. When tactical problems arose, it was her quiet suggestions that carried weight. She didn't seek the spotlight or challenge Marcus's authority directly, but leadership had shifted in a way that everyone recognized. They completed their remaining objectives ahead of schedule and returned to base as one of the first squads to finish successfully. As they trudged back into the company area, tired but victorious, Sarah caught Drill Sergeant Williams watching them with an unreadable expression on his face. He said nothing, but she saw something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Respect. The dynamics in Sarah's platoon shifted dramatically after the river rescue. Johnson, grateful to be alive, became her first real ally in the unit. Other recruits who had previously ignored her began to include her in conversations and seek her input on training exercises. Even Marcus, though still resentful, could no longer dismiss her contributions outright. But with recognition came new challenges. Sarah found herself walking a delicate line between proving her competence and avoiding the appearance of seeking special attention. Some recruits accused her of showing off, while others seemed to expect her to solve every problem the unit faced. The pressure was constant and exhausting. During weapons training, Sarah discovered another natural aptitude. Her small hands were actually an advantage with the M4 rifle, allowing for better trigger control and more precise shooting positions. She consistently scored among the highest in marksmanship, a fact that Marcus's remaining supporters found particularly irritating. Beginner's luck, they would mutter when her targets came back with tight groupings. Wait until we get to combat training. That's when the real soldiers separate from the pretenders. Sarah ignored the comments and focused on improvement. She spent extra time on the range, working with her weapon until she could field strip and reassemble it blindfolded. She studied ballistics and wind effects with the same intensity she brought to all her training. When the advanced marksmanship scores were posted, her name was at the top of the list. The harassment didn't stop, but it evolved. Unable to question her competence directly, some recruits began spreading rumors about why she was really there. They suggested she was a diversity recruit, that standards were being lowered to accommodate her, that she'd received special help that others hadn't. The whispers followed her everywhere, a constant background noise of doubt and resentment. Sarah's response was to work harder than anyone else. While others socialized during free time, she cleaned her gear, studied manuals, and practiced drills. She volunteered for every extra duty, tackled every challenge with grim determination. Her drill sergeants began to take notice of her consistency and dedication, though they were careful not to show favoritism. The real test came during the final field training exercise, a complex scenario that would determine who graduated and who had to repeat training. The exercise simulated a combat patrol in hostile territory, with recruits having to navigate, communicate, engage targets, and complete mission objectives while under constant pressure from opposing forces. Sarah was assigned to a different squad this time, one led by a recruit named Davis, who had emerged as a more collaborative leader than Marcus. The mission briefing was complex, involving multiple waypoints, timed objectives, and coordination with other units. As Davis outlined their approach, Sarah studied the map and noticed something troubling. The route they'd been assigned would take them directly through an area marked with subtle symbols that most recruits wouldn't recognize. But Sarah had spent hours studying military map symbols, and she knew they indicated a minefield. It was likely a test within the test, designed to see if anyone would catch the danger before it was too late. She raised her hand hesitantly. "Squad leader, I think there might be an issue with our planned route." Davis paused, looking at the map more carefully. "What kind of issue, Martinez?" Sarah pointed to the symbols, explaining what they meant and suggesting an alternative path that would avoid the danger area while still meeting their time requirements. Davis studied the map for a long moment, then nodded. "Good catch, Martinez. We'll adjust the route." The exercise began at dawn, with squads moving out into the training area under the watchful eyes of evaluators. Sarah's squad navigated successfully around the minefield area, while radio chatter indicated that at least 2 other squads had walked directly into the simulated danger zone and been eliminated from the exercise. As they moved toward their first objective, Sarah noticed movement in the tree line that didn't match the patrol patterns they'd been briefed on. Her training in observation and enemy tactics kicked in, and she recognized the signs of an ambush being set up along their planned approach route. She signaled Davis and pointed out what she'd observed. Acting on her intelligence, the squad was able to flank the ambush position and eliminate the opposing force instructors who had been preparing to attack them. The evaluators noted their tactical awareness and adaptive thinking. Throughout the day-long exercise, Sarah's contributions became increasingly valuable. She spotted hidden observers, identified tactical opportunities, and helped coordinate their movements with supporting units. Her map reading skills proved crucial when their GPS unit was damaged by simulated enemy fire, forcing them to rely on traditional navigation methods. By the time they returned to base that evening, Sarah's squad had achieved all their objectives and received commendations from the evaluators. More importantly, she had proven beyond any doubt that she belonged there. The other squad members, including some who had previously doubted her, openly acknowledged her contributions. Davis approached her as they were cleaning their gear. "Martinez, I owe you an apology. I listened to what others were saying about you instead of judging for myself. You're one of the best soldiers in this company." Sarah nodded, accepting the acknowledgement without false modesty. She had earned her place through competence and dedication, not through special treatment or lowered standards. The respect she was finally receiving felt different from anything she'd experienced before. It was based on performance, on proven ability under pressure. Graduation from basic training was only days away, and the atmosphere in the company had shifted dramatically. Sarah was no longer the outsider fighting for acceptance. She had become one of the most respected recruits in her unit. Her consistent performance and quiet professionalism had won over even the most skeptical of her peers. The transformation hadn't gone unnoticed by the drill sergeants either. Drill Sergeant Williams had begun using her as an example during training sessions, pointing out her attention to detail and tactical thinking to other recruits. She'd been selected as one of the honor graduates, a recognition that carried both pride and responsibility. But success brought its own complications. As Sarah packed her gear for the final inspection, she thought about the classified documents still hidden in her jacket lining. Throughout the weeks of training, she'd almost forgotten about them, caught up in the daily struggle to prove herself. Now, with graduation approaching, the weight of what she carried felt heavier than ever. The documents contained the real story of Miguel's death, information that had been classified to protect ongoing operations in Afghanistan. A sympathetic clerk at the casualty notification office had slipped them to her mother, believing the family deserved to know the truth. Miguel hadn't died in a random IED explosion as they'd been told. He'd been leading a convoy of wounded soldiers to safety when they were ambushed by insurgents. He'd stayed behind to hold off the attackers, allowing the wounded to escape. and had died fighting to the last round. The official story had been changed to protect the identities of the soldiers he'd saved and to avoid revealing tactical information that might endanger other units. But it meant Miguel's heroism had gone unrecognized. His family left to believe he'd simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Sarah had planned to find someone in authority to share the documents with, to ensure Miguel received the recognition he deserved. But basic training had consumed all her energy and attention. Now, with only days left, she wasn't sure who to approach or how to handle the sensitive information she carried. The final week brought a series of ceremonies and evaluations that would determine individual assignments after graduation. Sarah had requested infantry training, the same path Miguel had taken, despite suggestions from her instructors that her test scores qualified her for more technical fields that might offer better career prospects. During her final counseling session with Drill Sergeant Williams, he raised the topic directly. "Martinez, you've got options here. Intelligence, communications, logistics, jobs that could set you up for success after the military. Why are you so set on infantry?" Sarah chose her words carefully. "I want to serve where I can make the biggest difference, Drill Sergeant. Infantry is where soldiers are needed most." Williams studied her for a moment. "This about proving something? Because you've already done that. No one questions your ability anymore. It's about honoring a promise, Drill Sergeant, to someone who can't keep his own promises anymore." Williams nodded slowly, understanding passing across his features. He'd seen that look before, in soldiers carrying the weight of loss and the need to make meaning from it. "Fair enough, Martinez. Infantry it is." The night before graduation, Sarah lay awake thinking about the journey that had brought her to this point. She'd survived everything the Army had thrown at her, earned the respect of her peers and instructors, and proven that her brother's sacrifice hadn't been in vain. But she still carried the burden of his untold story, the knowledge that his heroism remained hidden in classified files. As dawn approached, she made a decision. She would graduate with honor, complete infantry training, and serve with distinction. But she would also find a way to tell Miguel's real story, to ensure his sacrifice was properly recognized. The documents in her jacket represented more than just paperwork. They were the key to giving her brother the honor he'd earned with his life. The graduation ceremony was scheduled for late morning, with families traveling from across the country to watch their sons and daughters become soldiers. Sarah's mother had worked extra shifts for months to afford the trip from Los Angeles, and the thought of seeing her pride at the ceremony filled Sarah with determination. But as she prepared for the day's events, checking her uniform one final time, and ensuring every detail met the exacting standards they'd been taught, Sarah had no idea that her carefully hidden secret was about to be discovered by someone who would recognize its significance immediately. The morning formation proceeded normally, with drill sergeants conducting final inspections and reviewing the day's schedule. The recruits stood at attention in perfect lines, the culmination of weeks of training evident in their bearing and precision. Sarah felt a surge of pride as she looked down the ranks at soldiers who had become more than fellow trainees. They'd become brothers and sisters, forged in the crucible of shared challenge. Commander Peterson was scheduled to arrive within the hour to review the graduating class and deliver remarks at the ceremony. Sarah had heard he was a decorated veteran with multiple combat deployments, someone who embodied the warrior ethos they'd been taught to embrace. She looked forward to hearing from someone who had walked the path she was preparing to follow. She had no way of knowing that Commander Peterson's experience included direct knowledge of the classified operations her documents described, or that he would recognize the significance of what she carried the moment he laid eyes on it. Commander Peterson arrived at Fort Benning with the bearing of a man who had seen too much war, but still carried himself with military precision. At 45, he was lean and weathered, with graying temples and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. His chest displayed ribbons that told the story of multiple deployments and commendations earned in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. As he reviewed the graduating recruits, Peterson moved down the line with practiced efficiency, offering brief words of encouragement and examining uniforms with a critical eye. The drill sergeants had prepared the recruits well. Everything was perfect, from the alignment of their formations to the shine on their boots. When Peterson reached Sarah, he paused as he had with others, conducting the same visual inspection. But something caught his attention. a slight irregularity in the way her dress uniform jacket hung. Years of experience had taught him to notice details that others might miss, and there was definitely something unusual about the left inner pocket area. "Martinez," he said, reading the name tape on her uniform. "You're one of the honor graduates." "Yes, sir," Sarah replied, standing rigidly at attention. Peterson's trained eye continued to study the anomaly in her jacket. The fabric was stretched slightly, suggesting something was sewn or hidden within the lining. His expression remained neutral, but his mind was already working through possibilities. In his experience, recruits who hid things in their uniforms were usually carrying contraband, cigarettes, candy, or personal items they weren't supposed to have. "Is there something you need to tell me about your uniform, Martinez?" Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. The documents had been carefully concealed for weeks, surviving multiple inspections and laundry cycles. She'd begun to think they were completely undetectable. Now, standing before a commander whose experience made him notice things others missed, she realized her secret was about to be exposed. "Sir, she began, then stopped. There was no point in lying to someone who clearly already knew she was hiding something. Peterson's expression softened slightly. He'd been expecting a stammered denial or excuse, but Sarah's honesty impressed him. "Step out of formation, Martinez. Drill Sergeant Williams, continue with the inspection. I'll handle this personally." Sarah followed Peterson to a quiet area away from the formation, her mind racing through possible consequences. Would she be dismissed from the Army just hours before graduation? Would her military career end before it had even begun? The weight of disappointing her mother, of failing to honor Miguel's memory, pressed down on her like a physical burden. "Whatever you're carrying, Martinez, now is the time to come clean about it," Peterson said, his tone firm but not unkind. "I've seen enough soldiers in enough situations to know when someone is hiding something. The question is whether you're going to be honest with me." Sarah took a deep breath and reached into her jacket, carefully extracting the sealed envelope that contained the classified documents. Peterson's eyebrows rose slightly as he recognized the official markings and security classifications printed on the outside. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice suddenly sharp with professional concern. "Sir, they're about my brother, Private First Class Miguel Martinez. He was killed in Afghanistan 6 months ago." Sarah's voice remained steady despite the emotion churning inside her. The family was told he died in an IED explosion. But these documents tell a different story. Peterson examined the envelope more carefully, noting the classification level and the unit designation stamped across it. His expression grew increasingly serious as he processed what he was seeing. "Martinez, do you understand what you're carrying? These are classified military documents. Possession of this material without proper authorization is a serious offense." "Yes, sir. But sir, my brother died a hero and no one knows about it. The official story doesn't match what really happened. These papers prove he saved lives, that he died fighting to protect wounded soldiers. His family deserves to know the truth." Peterson was quiet for a long moment, studying both the documents and the young woman who had carried them through weeks of training. His mind was working through the implications of what she'd told him, cross-referencing dates and unit designations with his own knowledge of operations in Afghanistan. "Martinez, what unit was your brother assigned to when he died?" 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, sir. He was a convoy security specialist." Peterson's face went pale. He knew that unit, knew that operation because he had been the one who had recommended PFC Miguel Martinez for a Bronze Star with V device for valor. The recommendation had been classified and buried in operational security protocols. The hero's actions hidden to protect ongoing missions and the identities of the soldiers he'd saved. "Private Martinez," Peterson said slowly, his voice carrying a weight that Sarah couldn't quite understand.
"I need you to tell me exactly how you came to possess these documents."
"And I need you to tell me the truth." As Sarah began to explain about the sympathetic clerk and her mother's desperate need to know how Miguel really died, Peterson realized he was standing face to face with the sister of one of the bravest soldiers he'd ever recommended for decoration. The classified marking she carried wasn't just evidence of a cover-up, it was proof of heroism that had never been properly acknowledged. Commander Peterson stood speechless for several long moments, the classified documents in his hands carrying far more weight than their physical presence suggested. Sarah watched his face transform as recognition dawned, confusion giving way to something that looked like awe mixed with profound respect. "Private Martinez," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Your brother saved my life." Sarah felt the world shift around her. "Sir?" Peterson looked directly into her eyes, and she saw something there she hadn't expected: grief, gratitude, and a deep sense of responsibility. "I was the convoy commander that day. Miguel Martinez didn't just die a hero, Private. He died saving 12 wounded soldiers, including me. I put him in for the Bronze Star with V device, but the paperwork got buried in classification protocols." The graduation ceremony continued in the distance, but for Sarah, time had stopped completely. Everything she'd endured over the past months, the mockery, the doubt, the grueling training, suddenly took on a different meaning. She wasn't just following in Miguel's footsteps. She was standing before the man her brother had died to save. He held that position for 47 minutes. Peterson continued, his voice growing stronger as he recounted the details. "Took fire from 3 different positions, used every round he had, called in our coordinates for air support even when he knew it meant revealing his own position. Those wounded soldiers are alive today because your brother refused to abandon his post." Tears ran down Sarah's face, but she remained at attention. "Sir, my mother." "She needs to know. The family needs to know he didn't just die randomly." Peterson nodded, understanding completely. "Private Martinez, what you've done today, completing this training, earning the respect of your peers, carrying your brother's memory with such honor, Miguel would be proud beyond words. Sir, what happens now? To me, to the documents?" Peterson was quiet for a moment, weighing his words carefully. "Officially, you shouldn't have these documents. Technically, this is a serious violation of security protocols." He paused, looking at the papers again. "But sometimes doing the right thing requires bending rules that were written by people who never had to tell a Gold Star mother that her son's heroism must remain secret. He made a decision that would have consequences far beyond this moment. I'm going to personally ensure that your brother receives the recognition he earned. The Bronze Star recommendation will be resubmitted through proper channels, and your family will receive the full story of his sacrifice." "You have my word on that." "And the security violation, sir." Peterson smiled grimly. "What security violation?" "A grieving family member happened to mention some details about her brother's service during a routine conversation. No documents were ever involved." He carefully tucked the envelope into his own jacket. "These will be returned to their proper files through appropriate channels." As they walked back toward the graduation ceremony, Peterson continued speaking. "Martinez, you've proven something important here. Not just that you can complete basic training, but that you understand what service really means. Your brother would be proud of the soldier you've become." The ceremony proceeded with Sarah standing tall among her fellow graduates, but everything had changed. When Commander Peterson delivered his remarks to the assembled families and new soldiers, his words about honor, sacrifice, and the bonds between warriors carried special meaning for one recruit in particular. After the ceremony, as families gathered with their newly minted soldiers, Sarah's mother approached with tears of pride streaming down her face. "Mija, I'm so proud of you. Miguel would be so proud too." "Mama," Sarah said, embracing her mother tightly. "I have something to tell you about Miguel, something important." Later that evening, Commander Peterson would make phone calls to contacts at the Pentagon, beginning the process of correcting an oversight that had left a hero's sacrifice unrecognized. The paperwork would take months to work through proper channels, but Miguel Martinez would eventually receive his Bronze Star, and his family would receive the full story of his final battle. The other recruits who had once mocked Sarah watched in confusion as Commander Peterson personally congratulated her after the ceremony, speaking to her with the respect reserved for proven warriors. They couldn't understand what had transformed their interaction, what had made this tough combat veteran treat a brand new private like an equal. Sarah understood, though. She understood that sometimes the greatest victories aren't won on battlefields, but in quiet moments when truth overcomes bureaucracy, when justice prevails over convenience, when the bonds between warriors transcend rank and regulation. As she prepared to leave for infantry school, carrying new orders and a new sense of purpose, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She'd entered basic training as Miguel's grieving sister, seeking to honor his memory through her own service. She was leaving as Private Martinez, United States Army, carrying forward not just her brother's legacy but his story. The classified markings that had once hidden Miguel's heroism were no longer a secret burden she carried alone. They had become the key to ensuring that a hero's sacrifice would finally receive the recognition it deserved, and that his family would know the truth about the son and brother who had given everything for his fellow soldiers.